Hello, everyone. Good morning. How's everyone doing today?
Not bad.
Not bad?
Not bad.
How many of you are hangover? Raise your hands. No one? Oh, there's a few. So before I start, I'm very curious, like how many of you here are environment artists? That's cool, so like half, which is great because I wanted to make this talk very universal, like if you are in other disciplines, I created this talk in a way that you can imagine the creative process too, and hopefully you can see how you can adapt to your work. So before we get started, just a little bit about myself. So I'm originally from Brazil. I live in the United States for the last 12, 13 years, and I started making 3D environments a long time ago. Like even though I'm young, I've been doing this for like 21, 22 years, because I started back in 2001, making maps for Counter-Strike, a lot of Half-Life mods, and then from there I went to Ubisoft, and then I went to Blizzard. I was there for 10 years. I worked on quite a few games there, like Overwatch, StarCraft 2, like a bunch of other projects. And then after Blizzard, I went to Tencent, and now I'm at 100 Thieves. So I separated some pictures here of some of the environments that I worked on in the last few years. Of course, the ones from Overwatch, I was part of the team, right? I didn't make everything, but those are areas that I worked like more. And some personal projects too. So like personal project, yes. So as you can see, like I like to work on environments that are very bright, like very stylized, but also very grounded, very believable. So today, this presentation will be split in two main parts. And don't worry, it's going to be very light, not going to be very technical, not going to burn your brain. And actually, I encourage you to use your imagination as you watch and see how you would apply these concepts, if you were creating an environment or a story or concept or whatever it is, music. So the first half, I'm going to talk about immersion in real-time experiences. So just going to share some of the stuff I learned about how to achieve this. And what I mean by this is this sense when you're playing a game or in a VR space and you're completely immersed, like when you forget about the world and you come back out of the game and you're like, oh shit, I was somewhere else, like I wasn't here. Even if for just a few minutes, that's the main reason I play games. Like if I don't get this feeling, I'm not interested, to be honest. And the second part is the environment art process, where I will show how I created this scene here, this Spanish town, which it's a project that I'm still working on. It's almost done. I've been working on this for 2 years. My main objective was to document my entire process and create a course, and also to create a VR scene that I can, put up on this Steam store and that kind of stuff. So that part's still ongoing. But at the end of the talk, there's going to be a link to download and a special surprise. So let's go. Immersion in real-time experiences. So when I started this talk, I just went to the dictionary. I was like, okay, how do they define immersion? And I found this definition that I just found was so beautiful. And the way they put it is the fact of becoming completely involved in something. And look at the example they gave. Total immersion in a video game is almost like living another life. So this is from the Cambridge Dictionary. And I was like, yes, that's why I make 3D environments. Of course, I love making textures, modeling, all that stuff, but it's this feeling of immersion. That's what drives me. And as an example, I want to show this real quick. So this is a VR scene I made years ago. It takes place in a futuristic São Paulo. And I released it for old Oculus DK2, doesn't run on the new hardware. I need to update this. But I found some video, some guy was walking around and just showing people this environment. And this part for me, represents, everything that I stand for as an artist. That was the coolest compliment I ever received for anything I worked on.
This is so cozy. I used to play this, not even just to do anything, just to listen to podcasts or eat and drink and just hang out someplace else. Look at how the wind affects the trees. That is so cool. Even some real games don't do that.
Even some real games. But it's it's I love how he's talking about he's not talking about a 3D space, right? He's like, oh, I love to come here to eat, listen to podcasts. It's a place, right? So this is when our work transcends, just bits, pixels, whatever they are, becomes an experience in someone's mind. So yeah, that's gonna be the main objective here. So I thought long about this and how can we achieve this, and I found a very simple formula for me, which is when we please both sides of the brain. And when I'm working, I'm always keeping these factors in mind. And this is the most simplified version I could think of. So our left side is more analytical, logical, right? So our brain is pleased when things have logic, when they have coherence, like when it's plausible, even if it's crazy sci-fi environment, like it needs to have this sense of like, oh, it could exist somewhere, right? And I get this even when I'm playing like Mario Odyssey, like you go to Crystal Land or whatever, but it's like, oh, in the world of Mario, that works, that makes sense, right? And yeah, like Cyberpunk was a great example, right? It's very high fantasy, sci-fi, but feels like a real place. And the other side is the artistic side, right? The right side. And this is pleased when things have a little stylization. And I'm going to explain more what I mean by this. By sensorial inputs, like sound, vision, right? Like pleasing the eyes, like pleasing compositions, like all the art fundamentals and patterns. I think the brain is very pleased when things repeat, when they have order. Like when they're random, it's very discomforting, and that's my problem with mega scans kind of environments, like when people are kit bashing these assets. Not wrong with that, you just have to do it in the right way. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about that very soon too. So just to expand a bit more on this, on the left side, the believability, and also I went back to the dictionary, and it's the definition capable of being believed, especially as within the range of known possibility or probability. So I remember I was watching Dragon Ball Z, and it's like, I love this series, watched so many times. And at some point I was like, man, this could exist somewhere in the universe, like somewhere in the universe, someone figured out how to channel this like life energy, and and they're fighting and stuff. So it doesn't need to be photorealistic, right? It can be fantasy, but it needs to make sense. And this believability is broken when we experience like incorrect representations, incompatible details, bugs, like all this kind of stuff. And a lot of times this can be subconscious things too, like for example, a sunset. We all have seen a sunset, right? And even if you don't know how to reproduce a sunset, if you see one in a game that is off, you're gonna feel like weird. So here I found this amazing example from Cyberpunk. And make you guys happy? Because I was looking at this picture, so I live very close to LA. And I couldn't find a single thing here that's off, like not a single detail that wouldn't be in LA. Like the prop placement is like a homeless camp, like the way the trash is distributed. It makes sense, like that's the right kind of concrete they use for the highways, That's how the mountains look like in LA. In a real place, they're much further. You don't see this kind of view. But nothing here, I'm like, oh, it's out of place, And yeah, so that's a really good example I found. And the other part is what I was talking about, stylization, right? So I really like this definition here. The process of simplification of an image, so only the necessary details are present. A common pattern repeated across the work. So you see, it doesn't mean like, oh, let's make cartoony, like Disney stuff. It just means like, oh, you simplify some of the details and you create some patterns, some processes. And stylization helps to achieve visual harmony, reduce production time, standardize art production, and make a product more appealing. So here's an example from the Spanish Town. So I was working this scene, I was getting pretty burned out. It was like I was working this for too long. And I was like, oh, maybe I can use a Mega Scans cliff, so I don't have to make the mountains. And like, okay, it's a cliff, right? But it didn't work. Like the scale is off, like the style is not there, like it clashes. Like when I put this cliff, that's the only thing I could see in the map. Like the eye just keeps looking there. I wouldn't look at anywhere else. So I made my own version. As you can see, it's my interpretation, right? I took a bunch of pictures, and I'm horrible at ZBrush, so this was a struggle to get there. But I think it matches, like much better. Like now it feels like it's part of the same environment. So here's another great example of stylization in a realistic game. So Resident Evil 2 Remake, this game has amazing environments, in my opinion, but as you can see, they're going for a realistic style, right? But there is a common style, right? Like the grime here looks the same as, it's kind of hard to see here, but like all the assets look like they were made by, the same person, or they were influenced by the same processes. So nothing stands out. And, and next, I chose this picture of Megascan's asset, and I don't want to like trash talk Megascans. It's amazing. I love Quixel, but this particular table, I tried to use it a few times. It doesn't work. Anywhere I put, like if you put this table in environments, that's the only thing you look at, because there's just too many details that an artist would never put. Like, because first it's a workshop table, so it has like an outlet here. Like the way the scratches were created, the rust, all that stuff was very specific to the real world place where this was scanned, right? So if you put this in a scene and the other thing around don't have those same processes, like suddenly your brain is like, oh, this doesn't belong, and the immersion is broken right away. So be very careful when you use unfiltered 3D scans. When I use 3D scans, sometimes I try to retexture them in Substance Painter or something, or do some cleanup, but definitely do some work on it. So that was the first part. So very, very easy, right? Very simple concepts. And so now I'm going to talk about how I created this environment and how you can create immersive environments too. And okay, so I split in 3 phases. The first step when starting a new project, environment, music, story, game, concept, whatever, use some keywords to guide you through the development of the project. Before you even start drawing, like, what are you going for, right? So like, here's some examples, like it can be very simple stuff, like, oh, I'm making a medieval castle, I'm making a futuristic slum, a cozy little village, right? Like, you listen to these keywords, and I'm sure that most of you already imagine something, like you imagine your own version of what this could mean, right? And for my specific case, I use these keywords. So Spanish style, it's inviting, hot day, it's not a touristic village, it's idyllic, small town. I just wanted to make it feel cozy, like a little place, like you are one of the locals. So why did I do these keywords? Because on the next step, research and concept, everything that I do converges to those keywords. If it doesn't match those keywords, I don't put it there. So with these keywords, we can build a library of references or create concepts, if you're a concept artist. And so I did a lot of research about Spanish towns. There were all kinds of styles, like there's some that are more like castles, like brown bricks, but then I found these ones in Andalusia, and I was like, yes, exactly what I'm looking for, because the architecture is simple. I like the whites with the greens and stuff, so then I narrowed down on that research. And always be creative and find inspiration in unconventional places. Like a lot of times artists do today, they just go to ArtStation and they save a bunch of stuff that was done before, and like nothing wrong with that, but then your work's gonna look like other works, right? It's gonna be harder to stand out. And I just saved a ton of pictures. You can use pure ref too, but I separate them by folders, so back alley, backdrop, buildings, using these keywords. So all good, right? We got the keywords, the research, and now let's use our imagination. Like before I do any 3D work, I imagine the environment first. So I just put all this stuff in my mind and I let it simmer for a few days, sometimes for weeks. And then I create a little word building like piece, like a description of the environment. So like here's this example, like a cozy and inviting small town near the coast in Spain, a place not too touristic, but a small place where you would like to visit on a low-key trip. The weather is hot, the day is sunny, the birds sing loud. The architecture is simple, made of humble materials, the place is decorated with lots of flowers and plants. And I'm sure like as you read this, you can already imagine something, right? Like it already exists in your mind. And at this time, I like to imagine all the details, peculiarities of the environment, like go deep in this. And with all this information, all this imagination, this is when the environment comes to life for the first time, the first iteration, is the paper design. So here is the paper design I created for this. So this is the first iteration of that environment. I took maybe a month or so, like researching, imagining, and thinking about these things. And I just drew what I was imagining, and I'll show you in the end, like the final map is very close to that. So always working in the entire environment at once. So with all that preparation, we are ready to actually start building something in 3D. And the first step, always the blockout or gray box. And for this step, I highly recommend you to use the simplest tools you can find because you want to get in the zone, like you want to get in this flow mode. You don't want to be struggling with tools like, I use extrude or cut edges, I created this blockout, and I'm going to show just using primitives like cubes, triangles, because then the only operations I was doing is like scaling, rotating, very simple stuff, like you don't get tired. So this is the simplest form of the environment, but I made the entire environment, like I didn't leave one corner to make later. And this is the foundation that I'll be building for months, for years in some cases, right? So make sure the compositions, all this stuff is good, you understand what it is you're doing. And this is very important. The entire map should be playable at all times. All times. You should always be playing, even on this stage. And I'll show later, like, it didn't change much from here. So here's what I was talking about, the modular kit, and I have a quick video here. Just, it's sped up, so it's a little, for the sake of time, but as you can see, that's how I built that block out, just with these pieces, scaling, moving, like no modeling, like none of that stuff, no UV, like you don't want to waste time with that stuff. You just want to get something playable very quick. So as you can see, this is something that anyone can do, right? Like anyone can open the editor, move the camera, scale stuff, like not hard at all. Okay, so once that's done, I go to the art blockout cleanup phase. So use an example, if you're writing a story, right? Like so far you use the keywords and you wrote the little prompt and then you have like a draft, right? And then you write like an improvement, so it's the same process. And so at this stage, I export these pieces to Maya and I start modeling. And I create these assets, they're like real assets that I'm gonna finalize later. They are not detailed, I'm not putting too much effort, I just wanna clean up the environment so I know how much work it's gonna be. And at this stage too, I reuse a lot of things too. So for this entire environment, I think I only made 4 buildings. And they have 2 different sides, and I'm just like copy pasting and I use different sides to replace that block out. And here's real quick how this process looks like. Like I brought into my modeling package, if you're using Blender, 3ds Max, it's the same process, right? Like just bring my scale reference and then I'm gonna just model on top of this. And then I go back to the map and then I replace that levels and block out with this. Because this is the model that I'm going to work for real. You know, that's the one I'm gonna texture and I'm gonna detail later. As you can see here, like it's very easy to, you know, like move the buildings and play with the composition once you get them in there, because it's just one object. Okay. So the last step here in the preparation phase is the lighting. And I'm not talking about like doing like a final lighting, but get the foundation there, you know, like if you're doing a sunset, you know, like you can look for the physical values, the camera exposure, like all this stuff, you know, like get this stuff right. You don't need to finalize, but get it right. Because as you can see here, just those crappy models, you know, like floating geometry, you see like how rushed this is, right? Like I didn't spend any time on these models. Like you can already see the environment there, right? Hopefully. Yes, so at this stage, your environment should already start to feel immersive. So far so good? So, okay. Okay, that was the easy part. That was the quick part. And here is where the pain begins, because to go from that art block out to the final map, it took me a year. So the stuff you're gonna see now is gonna look like kind of like magic, right? Because they're just springing into existence. But there was a lot of suffering here. There was a lot of pain. A lot of times I wanted to give up on this environment. It's too much work. But then there were so many people that were waiting for the tutorials. I would keep that in mind. It's like, man, I don't want to disappoint these people, you know. So there were like 4 or 5 times that I was like this close to giving up. But I pushed through, and I'm glad I did. So like once we have, you see, it's the same model here. But then I start to explore. This is art exploration. So I'm creating some tileables. I'm looking for the style of the map. And if you're working on a game that already exists, you probably don't need so much in this phase, right? Because the style is already figured out. But in my case, I was trying to create a new style. I didn't want this to look like Overwatch, because I was working so long for so many years on Overwatch. I wanted this to have its own identity. So I started with this texture. I was also learning Substance Designer at the time, and the plaster wall I had to remake 4 times. Like I tried 4 different things. I tried different processes until I'm like, oh, okay, I like this. So also at this stage, I'm creating tools, like smart materials, you know, stuff that I can use to maintain the style. Like everything that I created this stage, I'm like, how can I reproduce this? How can I make more of this? If you're making very like one-off things, it's gonna be very hard to maintain the consistency. And don't worry about things not looking great yet. Just trust the process. Keep working, iterating. So here's another update. You know, like it's the same models. I'm just throwing these tileables in there to see how they feel. And so this floor was when it clicked for me. I was like, oh, okay, I got the style now. You know, like that's what I'm going. There is a little stylization, but also it's not cartoony, right? So from there, you can also create a beautiful corner. For example, so this one has the final plaster wall. You know, after I remade it so many times, I was like, okay, I like this one. This one feels good. So you can also create like a little beautiful corner that you can use to propagate to the rest of the map. And again, like I'm always working the entire map at once. So that exploration phase took me about 5 or 6 months. Like, no kidding. I was like, man, I don't know, I can't do this, you know. And then I kept trying, and then someday I was like, oh, that looks cool. And then it gets easy. But that part in the middle is when most people give up, I think, because like you get super excited in the beginning. It's very easy to start stuff, you know. But then when reality hits you, and you see how much work it's gonna be to finish stuff, it's like most people are like, oh, I can't do this. But anyway, not you guys here. I know you're gonna finish your stuff. So using those stylables I created before, I start to finalize the architecture. So I'm not doing any props, I'm not doing any detailing yet, just finalizing the buildings and the ground. So yeah, here's some pictures of how this looks like. So you see, these are just those same buildings that I made that block out before, but now I just refined the modeling. I put the same tileables everywhere. I used very few tileables. I forgot to put a picture, but I only made about 8 or 9 different tileables for this map. And tileables, I mean, you know, like, this is one tileable Like this is another, the doors are props. But with those few elements, I could create all the buildings, which was the reason I chose the theme tree in the beginning, like with the white plaster Spanish village. So yeah, here's an example of how this looks like, right? With the art block out, and some buildings are more finalized. And so here is the same road with these same buildings, but with some final textures. And you can see like it's halfway, like this one is still art block out, but this one is finalized, that one is ongoing. And at this stage, you still have room to experiment. Like here, the road feels very narrow, so I expanded it a little after. And okay, so I really want to make this like a hammer on this, like trust the process, like after you got here, this looks okay, but it still doesn't look like, like not so cool. But once you get to this stage, and then you get to the set dress and the prop, that's when things look good. But you need to get there first. So to start, first I looked in the marketplace to see what I could reuse, right? I'm not gonna make every single prop. I'm horrible at making foliage. I'm not even gonna try. So I found this package from Anastasia Ermakova that worked perfectly for what I was looking for. Like those little trees, I used the hell out of them. And there's a bunch of little plants, some flowers and stuff. So I paid, I don't remember how much, $29, $39, something like this. But imagine if I was gonna make this, right? It would take me months and it would not look anywhere as good as this. And then after I saw what I could reuse from the marketplace, I started to make the props that I needed. So these were very simple props. So for example, the church door, I made this with Substance Painter, like a cross. This statue here, I didn't model, but I found on Sketchfab, there was a bunch of 3D scans from a museum. So this is public domain models. And I just retextured in Substance Painter. And I was still learning Substance Painter at the time, so it looks pretty poopy. And you can see like it's not clean, like the model is like auto UVs, but who cares? The point of this map is not this statue, right? It's just a prop. But in a proper, if you're working on a team, right, some prop artist would create a kick-ass statue for this. So once I have all these props, I think that's when the map looks good. It starts to look good, like that's when you're like, oh shit, now it's looking cool. So I use this library and I'm creating these little stories, right? Because I have the foundation done. You see like how I'm working in steps, so I'm not getting overwhelmed, right? Like I took care of each problem, in their own phase. So now that this foundation is done, it's very easy to spend time on this because like you can do this all day. You're not gonna get tired. You're just placing props and plants and rotating and creating these little things. Like, I kind of envy people that work as level artists, right? Because you can just sit down there and like, oh, let's put all this stuff. But like the modeling texture, that burns my brain. Like if I'm working on a texture, sometimes like 2 or 3 hours, like I'm done for the day. Modeling too is like 1 hour and a half or something like this, and I'm done. Like I'm a vegetable. But this kind of stuff, you can do a ton of it. So here I was imagining like, oh, what if some like old lady lives here and she takes really good care of her plants, and later I'm gonna talk about sounds, and there was a very cool sound that I put here. So here's another example, like if you remove try to imagine how this would look like without the props, right? Like very bare bones, just like a wall, some dirt, like stone, right? Like a window. But then like once you put the props, you put the bicycle, you get the story, you get scale, like props, they really help with scale. And that's a big problem sometimes in the level design block out. If you don't have little props just for scale, you might end up making things that are huge or tiny. So always be checking scale. And this is when VR really helps. Like when I was working on this level design, I jumped into VR and I was like, oh my God, this is like humongous. Like the door knob was like here, like on the first version. So these things, they break the immersion too, right? Even if you can't tell that it's off, the brain it doesn't feel very like happy about it. So here's another step that I do like at the end, which also very quick. Like the cool thing about using this process is like once you get to this step, this kind of stuff is very quick. So to do this decal pass in the entire map took me just 1 day. I just made a few like grind corners, some like wet stuff here. You can see there, like, and with this, I'm covering all the corners. You know, like those corners, they really break the immersion when you see these hard edges. It's not perfect, you know, it's still a little hard there. I could improve that. But this made a huge difference, you know, like the little leaks on the window. I only made 4 or 5 different decals for this map. And it's like once you make one, you just go over the entire map and you propagate. It's very easy. And here's something that I always leave for the end, like the backdrop, you know, like the vista. Because a lot of times you can get away with like pretty crappy looking things. Because look at this, I didn't even finalize this model, by the way. Like some textures are like stretched and stuff, but it doesn't matter because this is in the backdrop, you know, like they need to be very cheap. And I also made this mountain with word machine, like just one mesh, you know, like no terrain, no, just a normal mesh. And then I'm like duplicating, scaling, you know, like kit bashing. Like I just made one mountain to make this entire backdrop. And also because I'm working VR, so it needs to be very performance friendly, right? And the same model I use there in the back. So I use it to create planes, you know, just scale it down so it's like flat, or you scale it up and it's a huge mountain. But yeah, like if you do this in the end, it's very easy. So we are almost at the end here. It's going much faster than I thought. So here is like a video of how the final environment looks like. And the last step, but not the least important one, is sound. You know, like this is what brings everything together, because now you're combining all the different senses, right? You have the vision, you have the sound. Now is when you get the complete experience. And for the sounds in this environment, I hired Emma Kramer-Roger. She's awesome. If you need sounds, music, I always work with her in my personal projects. And I requested some sounds like, oh, like some kids running in the kitchen and the mother cooking, and she's like, oh, you guys stop running. Or there's like a soap opera, some like weather forecast. And I gave this very abstract prompts, and she created some very cool sounds. So let's take a look how the environment feels like with the sounds.
Ya, detente. La comida estará lista en unos minutos.
I really wanted to have the sounds of TV coming from the inside of the buildings too. I think it's super immersive in games when developers do this. Oh, and she got a friend to do the vocals too, like a car. And here's my favorite, the soap opera. Yeah, so that's the environment. So I wanted to finish the talk with some takeaways, like what are we gonna take from this, right? So immersion occurs when the mind's not questioning anything it perceives, when both sides of the brain are pleased. So that's what I was talking about with the logic and stuff, you know, like if you nail this, you're not gonna have problem. Like the art doesn't need to be amazing, you know, it's just the combination of things creates this sense of immersion. Working stages, but always on the entire environment or project at once. Like always look at the forest, and then you go to the trees. And for a long time, I used to do the opposite. I would start with the trees, and it's like, oh, make a really beautiful tree, like metaphorically speaking, and then I'm like, okay, how do I make the forest? I was like, I don't know, just go to the next project. So I abandoned so many projects because I would just make a corner, and I didn't know how to make the rest of the environment. And take the time to imagine, understand what it is you are building before you actually build it. Like, this helps me so much. A lot of times I'm doing work, not on the computer, but like when I'm taking a shower or taking a walk, or like before bed, like I'm creating in my mind, imagine how I'm gonna build. And become a keen observer of nature. Learn to reproduce natural phenomena that we all understand intuitively, even if in a very stylized manner, like study, like go outside, see how lighting behaves, like how bright the sunlight is compared to like light pulses and like all this stuff. You become a more complete artist. And so here's the comparison that I talked before. Like my first drawing and then 2 years later, the final environment, as you can see, it's very close, right? Like the main street here and the church. The back alley in the drawing is very small. I had to make it a little bigger. But yeah, like pretty close, right? And here's another example too of the same area, how it looked like in different stages. And you see that it's what I made there is what I finished in the end 2 years later. It's the same thing. Like I'm working in steps, but when I was here, I didn't know that it was gonna look like this, right? It's like you're uncovering the more you work, it comes to life, and then you uncover it. So don't feel discouraged if at this stage you feel a little lost. Keep going through the process. Like trust the process. Remember this, and you're gonna get somewhere. And it's gonna surprise you. It's gonna be better than you expected. So yeah, that's my talk, and I want to thank you guys. And so I put this page here where you can grab the VR build, but also as a gift to you, you can get a copy of the course for free. Like just go in there, there's gonna be a link. I'm gonna, maybe, I put here 24 hours, maybe it'll be for the rest of the week, but you can get the full course, like if you wanna follow this process. And the VR demo. And here's some contact if you wanna message. If any publishers are here and they're like, oh, this VR scene looks cool, like let me know. But yeah, that's all I got.
We've got 10 minutes for Q&A. So any questions?
Actually, I have two questions, but quite simple.
Yes.
The first one is how to define scene in the terms of game dev. It's more like this simple, beautiful corner or like small location?
So yeah, that's a very good question, right? I think it really depends on what you're looking for. For me, I like to work on environments. Like I'm not a huge fan of just making a little scene, because my job title is 3D environment artist. It's not like scene artist, right? So it's a different specialty. I think scenes are amazing if you want to go into animation or like movies and stuff, right? You don't need to make the whole environment, right? You can make corners. But if you want to work in the industry, if you want to grow in your career as an environment artist, I think it's very valuable to be able to know how to make full environments if you have to. And this is something that I learned on Overwatch, because when I started there, I was working on like little corners, and then I learned more, and I was like, okay, now I can take a whole area. And then in the end, I was working on the entire map, like not, of course, all by myself, but like most of it. But it was a process.
Okay, thank you. And the second one is how to manage with this simple imperfection that are inevitable, like when you put texture of some rocks, for instance, near the ground, and there is small, little, tiny rock, and it ends like with
hard
line.
So
How
that's the things that you do in the end. Like once the thing is there, you cover all the stuff. Like you can take 2 or 3 days and cover all the problems. You can put props on top, you can bullshit, there's a lot of ways to do this, you know. A lot of times in game development, I would get a bug like, oh, there's a texture seeing him, and I would just put a prop on top, you know, like you get so many bugs, right, and you need to go quick. Players don't notice these things. Like, unless something's very visible, you know, unless it's very distracting, no one is gonna notice. And when you play games, if you start paying attention, you're gonna find this everywhere.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for the talk.
Of course, thank you. More questions?
Something more? Can you walk up to the microphone?
I love your shirt, by the way.
Hi, thanks for the talk. You were making maps for, traditional FPSs and for VR. I was wondering, what did you find was the main difference?
The main difference, I think, is the tools now. You know, like when you used to make maps for Counter-Strike or Half-Life, you kind of made everything in the editor, right? And now, to make a full environment, you need to do some modeling, you need to do texturing, and then it's Substance, ZBrush, Photoshop. That's the part of my job that I don't like so much anymore. Like too many different steps, and I think this breaks the flow, you know, like going from one program to another. And I remember like back in the day when I was working on Half-Life maps, I could do that all night. I would start at like, I don't know, like 9 p.m. and finish like 6 a.m. and go to school and be fine, right? And like now I work like 2 hours and I'm done. I need a nap, you know? It's like, I don't know if I'm getting old or it's too much coffee or whatever, but I think it's the tools, you know? They were simpler. It was easier to just be zoned out, you know, like moving brushes, you know, like adjusting textures. That's the part that I miss. Like being able to do everything in one package.
Any questions more? Okay, I think this is it, so thank you.
Cool. Thanks, guys.